Hello, everybody. This is John Browning back with the Building Your Life podcast once again. And we have an interesting guest with us today, John Knowlton. And John has written a book. He's also got a passion project that he's working on that I think is extremely important to talk about and for people to understand and get educated about. But, John, can you just introduce yourself? Tell us what you do, and more importantly than that, why you do it.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, John. By the way, it's my hope that this conversation is the most impactful conversation that the listeners hear all week. So I've been a dual career guy my whole adult life. I've been a part-time pastor and a full-time business guy. So I've started three different RIAs, registered investment advisor firms with partners, and had the pretty good fortune and good hard work of building one that when I exited was managing $1.25 billion of client assets, and that firm has continued to succeed and go on. They're over $4 billion now, so it's
Wow.
a great legacy, and I'm super proud of the partners who continue to work. What I've been doing recently, though, is experimenting on my own family. Now, that might sound a little weird, but what I mean is this. My wife, Julie, and I are a little dissatisfied with the traditional estate planning model where mom and dad have some money and they do whatever they want with it. And then when they die, they dump whatever's left on their poor, unsuspecting children. And we just didn't think that was a good stewardship model. And so our family has decided that we want to maintain our identity as a force for good for generations. And to that end, we have invited our adult children into shared governance, which is a way of making decisions together about the family's money. And so that's the project that we're doing in our family. And I'm learning how to help other families do the same.
See, I think this is something that, first of all, estate planning, just to start with, is surprisingly not talked about in families because it's a little bit of an uncomfortable subject for people. So that's like the first step. But this second step that you're talking about is something that we encourage folks to do. And I think there's this strange feeling out there that you have to have $100 million or some massive amount of money to really plan this way and to create a family unit that preserves the values and the structure of the family and the wealth of the family for generations, not just to have it end after you're gone or after I'm gone. And I'm glad that you're doing that. But I'm curious too about some of the things that you talk about with families and what amount should you start thinking about? Like if you have $100,000, this may not be quite what you want to do just yet. But if you've got a couple $1 million saved up for retirement that you're going to use right in retirement and everything else, but if you are are wise about it, that maybe it's two, maybe it's five, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20. Talk about that because I think a lot of people just say, oh, this is not for me and turn it off immediately. Who's this for?
Yeah, well, you said that we don't talk about estate planning much, and the truth is we don't talk about money much in families, let alone
Correct.
estate planning. And I've done a bit of research on this, and it depends. The reasons why people don't talk about money are kind of tied to their socioeconomic status, but all of the answers or all of the reasons are connected to negative emotions, shame or fear, or I don't want to turn my kids into nepo babies or steal their drive, or uh, all these negative emotions. But we can't let our negative feelings affect our stewardship and our purpose of building a great family. And so I actually encourage people to start talking with their families as soon as they can talk. And as soon as they can count, you should be talking about money. So in the book I wrote called Thinking for Success, one of the chapters is called What's Dinner For? And sometimes that we come home from work, and if there's somebody else already there, you might say, "Hey, what's for dinner?" But that's not the important question. In my opinion, the the purpose of dinner. What is dinner for? Yes, we need calories and nutrients and all that. But dinner, that time when the family gathers together, is for uh, it's for relationship development and values transmission. And so we encourage people to have the two question conversation. How was your day? And this allows you to talk about how did you interact in the world? How did you serve your customers, your clients? How did you interact with vendors or people from church or people from the community? And your kids are learning, how do mom and dad interact with each other? What's a healthy relationship look like? And how does a good family interact with the world? And then the second question is, what do you need from me tonight? And the kids are learning, oh, parents care about their spouse and they care about their children. And so now we're developing a habit of actually having conversations. And then as soon as your kids can count, we encourage them to have an allowance. In our family, we tithe. We pay the first 10% of our income back to the church as a discipline and a way of reverencing God, who's our provider. And and so, if they get $5, 50 cents goes in the bucket and that kind of thing. And so you can actually begin talking about money and developing the habit of talking with your family members about important things when they're 2 years old. So you don't have to have any net worth. You could do it when you're negative net worth, but you're developing the habit and then the pattern of having conversations.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a few things there too that made my mind go back to if you consistently have those conversations, and you and your spouse, particularly if you have that family unit, which I hope that you do, because there's nothing more valuable to me than my wife and our kids. But it may not be your value set. Maybe you're single or whatever at this point. But having that conversation consistently also does a couple other things, I think. Number one, it eliminates or mitigates the fear of judgment if you actually say how your day really was. Because how
Mm,
many people lie every single time they say, "Hey, how was your day?" "Oh, fine." And we write it off. But what if it wasn't fine? Is it okay to talk about that? What if it was wonderful and you want to share a success, but you're afraid somebody else didn't have a good day and you don't want to talk about that? I think it's just really healthy because nobody always has good days. Nobody's day is always fine. And you got to celebrate the wins, even if somebody else didn't have those times. So I think that habit is very, very healthy in the first place and creates an environment where everybody truly shares what's going on. And that's the only way I think that you're going to get to a position where you can have these conversations that you're talking about estate planning. Guess what? There are two things that are going to happen: death and taxes, right? We can mitigate taxes, but there's nothing we can do about death. And yet we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. But wow, what if we did? How powerful could that be for our families?
yeah,
And what you just described to me was a systemized process for creating that from the time that your kids are younger to the time that they're adults, and making it just a normal conversation, not an uncomfortable one. It just
right.
is.
Yeah, and I can imagine somebody's 50 years old listening to this and saying, "Gosh, we didn't do that. Oh man, are we hosed? No, is all hope lost?" And I'd say no. But before you can talk about sort of big emotional topics like money and death, you've you've got to learn how to just have regular conversations. And so I would just encourage you to own it and say, "Hey, adult kids, I think we could do a better job of having regular conversations. And so I wonder if you hop on a call with me for 20 minutes on Sunday afternoons or whatever the case. Learn what's important to them. If they like football, learn about football. If they like something else, learn about horse riding or whatever it is. Just develop a relationship so that you can get the rhythm and the habit of having conversations, and then you can start to get into issues and topics that might carry a little more baggage to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I have that with my own clients, and you as being an RIA like Guardian Rock Wealth, you are much bigger than Guardian Rock Wealth, by the way. But um, the best clients are ones that will allow me to take the time to get to know them away from their money. It's like the
Mm,
money is the secondary thing that I want to talk about, right? The first part I want to talk about is what is it that you want to do and why?
yeah.
And then once you tell me why, I'll probably ask you why three or four more times to get to the real why. And then we've got a target, right? Because the money's the tool, it's not the end goal. And how you use it can be so powerful. And I think teaching maybe the older adults not to be as scared as some of them are of investing and
Mm,
understanding that investing and using your money and using the tools that are available for money are not gambling. They can actually be used and should be used to mitigate risk and to accomplish certain things that you want to accomplish within the plan. And at the same time, teaching the kids who this is not taught in schools. Now I think there's a course that they call budgeting or some such thing, and my kids went through it. They're grown now, but my kids went through that, and it was almost silly.
uh,
It was like it just didn't cover the things that you and I know need to be covered and addressed and talked about. Well, parents have that opportunity and obligation to teach their kids about that. Otherwise, it's like, what's the percentage now of people who win the lottery that go bankrupt within 5 years? I think
most.
it's
Yeah.
70-80% go
Yeah.
bankrupt because all of a sudden you get a lottery ticket, right, a winner, but kind of the same thing. You get an inheritance, and you're like, you don't really know how to handle it. But if
Yeah.
you have this structure set up, it's a family unit.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I'll tell you, John, there's all kinds of you just talked about lottery winners, and so now we know those stories and we think, gosh, if you get a lot of money, that's bad. Lots of money equals bankruptcy in a few years. So we really want our kids to learn how to handle money, how to make decisions, how to use our value system to guide our decision making. And another issue that a lot of families face is there's sort of one kid who needs lots of attention. Either mom and dad's a physical time and attention, or they need money, or they've been through rehab 3 times, or they can't keep a job, right? We've all seen this maybe in our own families. And we've invited our adult kids into making those decisions together. So we had an example where one of our kids got in trouble. And I was faced with this question: do I swoop in and come up with a lawyer and potentially bail money and things like that, or do I allow natural consequences to have their course and let that be a learning lesson? And I realized whichever decision I make, it might be the wrong one, and it might be the wrong one in the eyes of my other kids. Now we're building a seed for resentment to grow. And I said, I will not bear this burden alone. And so I called the board together, which is my family, and said, hey, here's the issue. Give me your thoughts. And they were really insightful. They actually articulated pros and cons of each position, and we sorted through it together. And so whatever the outcome was, it was our decision. There was no room for resentment because they were the decision makers. So there might be
So,
regret, but they weren't going to resent me or resent the other kid because we all made the decision together.
right. And ultimately there has to be a leader, which at this point, as the patriarch, that's you. But you're taking and you're making sure they understand that you're taking all of their input into consideration,
Yeah.
right? I think that's just so incredibly powerful. I'm so glad you're on the podcast today to deliver this message
Mm.
because I think it's so needed. And again, you don't have to have multiple millions of dollars to create this. What are some of the tools, though, that just practical tools that you see? And you don't have to give away the whole package here, but Do you put together a trust? Do you put together an actual corporation, or do you combine the S corp, LLC, all that kind of stuff to protect things? What do you usually suggest?
Yeah. Well, so before we get to documentation, we need to figure out what it is we're building. And so the tools that we use for is really is a conversation, but it needs to be structured and done the right way. And so I use a tool called Brainwriting. John, I just wonder, have you ever done Brainwriting?
I have not. This is the
Okay.
first time that I've heard of that. So tell me what it
All
is.
right. So we've all experienced brainstorming. There's a topic or a question, and people verbally toss their ideas out. And um, that's fine for some things. But what I've noticed is there tends to be somebody who's got more status. In my family, that's me, right? I'm the big dog, right? But it could be somebody else, the loud person, the one that's more outgoing or what have you. And their opinion tends to either drown out or influence the other's opinions. So brain writing is different. It makes sure that we get everybody's voice. And so I'll pose a question. Now, let's just say, we'll start at the very beginning. What might our family's particular mission be? What's unique about our family? Okay, you got 90 seconds, and everyone has to write on a piece of paper quietly. And then I'll say, all right. And I start with the quietest person. Susie, what did you write down? And you have to read what you wrote, and you can't be influenced by what the person before you said. Read what you wrote, and we collect it all. And the high status person always goes last because we don't want to be influencing their ideas. Now we've got 20 things maybe. Okay, hey, let's narrow it down. If we had to pick, I'll give you all four votes. Vote for four of those that you think might be close to what are, and then we just go through this process of winnowing it down and narrowing it down. So brain writing, John, is one of the key tools that I use to facilitate these conversations and help get us to an agreement or a consensus on what's our family's mission, what's our vision. In other words, if we're succeeded our mission, how will the world be different? That's what a vision is. How are we going to change the world? And then what are the values that are going to govern our behavior, that how we show up in the world and interact with each other. And so that's the conversation is the tool. And the brain writing and these other elements are the techniques that we use. And then to answer well, I'll stop there and see if you have any comments or questions on that.
That sounds really cool, and like it would be extremely valuable. I like taking the quietest one first and directing who goes first instead of there's always you're right. There's always one or two people that'll be like, oh, I'll get mine. That doesn't bother them, but the quiet person, it's hard for them. So encouraging them to go first and then not be influenced, and nobody's scribbling on the piece of paper as the other person's talking, right? That's a rule too,
Yep,
right?
yep,
You
yep,
can't, no changing things after
yep,
your first impression and answer. Yeah.
yeah,
You have a
yeah.
chance to do that, right? After you get everybody's together. Oh yeah, I agree. Maybe mine's not great. And I agree with more with these two or three other ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that it's a way to yeah, value everyone's insights and opinions and really bring them in to a sense of ownership. So there's this sense of ownership, which is really important. You have to have a sense of ownership, I think, before you have legal ownership, or else you're not going to know what to do with your legal ownership. And so that's the question you were asking um, earlier, John, about trusts or corporations or things like this. And so if your family has enough money that you're probably going to pass some down, you probably have multiple brokerage accounts, dad's IRA, mom's IRA, a joint account or something like this. Maybe you own some real estate, maybe you own a business interest. I think I filed 4 LLC tax returns this week. So, things can get a little bit complicated,
Yeah.
but whatever the level of complexity, um, each of those entities or accounts can be owned by a family LLC. We call it a family LLC. And then all of the governance just takes place on one document. And so, in other words, who owns what percentage, and you can actually separate ownership from voting shares so that you can, over time, progressively transfer some legal ownership to the second generation, or maybe you want to transfer some authority through voting shares. You can do that progressively over time, and you only have to update one account. That's the family LLC, which is a member of all the other or owner of all the other accounts. And so it's super high level. That's the sort of the tool or technique that we use to manage the governance. But that's all driven by those conversations that we have through our regular board meetings, as well as our investment and philanthropy committee meetings.
Yeah. So in that sort of one document that rules them all, so to speak,
Mhm.
one of the struggles that I have heard of from this type of idea is that sometimes you have one family member or maybe two or three or whatever that's like, I don't want to participate.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. Y'all are nuts or whatever. And do you create a mechanism then for them to exit the family unit in a way that is amicable, and we still keep them, we still invite them over for Thanksgiving dinner, they're still a part of the family, but they're not a part of this essentially organization, right? And the legacy planning, they just decided they'll take their piece of the pie or whatever and go home. Is there a mechanism in there for that?
Yeah. So that really, each family needs to figure that out for themselves, of course, because every family is unique. And I'm living that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Two of my four children, we've presented this idea to them, and they've opted not to participate yet. They've both said, and they're the youngest too. I think it feels really adult and maybe a little overwhelming and all that kind of thing. And so, and presumably I'll stay alive for a while, and they've given me permission to ask them once a year. So at Christmas, we retell the story. So the way that my wife Julie and I approached this with the kids the very first time was telling our story of our marriage in what we call our faith and finances story. Here are key moments in our family's history, key decisions that we made, and how we felt God was prompting us to move, and what the outcome was. And we've got pictures of the kids at those stages and all this kind of thing. And so it's a telling of the story, just like the Jews tell the story of the Exodus at Passover every year, and Christians tell the story of Jesus' resurrection at Easter every year. We've got the Knowlton family faith and finances story. And so every year, those kids have to sit through it, or they've agreed to, and it ends with an invitation. Would you like to participate in this family project? So your question implies, well, if they don't want to, do they get any money? Well, that we haven't made that decision yet, and it hasn't been pressing yet. But basically, the kids aren't getting much money because this is a family project, and therefore we're not going to split it up four ways or six ways or whatever, and then the next generation splits it up 14 ways, and then that's how assets get dissipated.
Mm-hmm.
They go poof. And so our kids have agreed they get the benefit of decision making and learning and family bank. One of our kids is a general contractor, and the family money is doing joint ventures with him and funding construction projects. And he's making money, and the family's making money. Dad runs his staff meetings so that he's learning, and he's a young man, but dad's been doing business for 35 years. So he's getting the benefit of that experience, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
any case, the invitation is to participate in this project and benefit from the family's assets and values and infrastructure now instead of waiting until you're dead. In exchange, you're not getting a quarter of the money because this is a multi-generational family project.
Which I think is super powerful. There's so many things to unpack here that my brain is a little bit reeling, like which one to address first. But the first, this is fantastic. The first thing that comes to mind as I think about our conversation is it requires humility from the patriarch or matriarch, that person, that loudest person on the room, requires humility from them, and yet it also requires humility from the other members of the family and acceptance of different ideas, which I think is a great life lesson. And how much stronger are you if you have a cord that's more than one person strong?
Yeah.
You start wrapping other cords around that cord, it just becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And so that comes through stewardship, which is another big topic of mine. The next book that I'm writing is all about not just stewardship of money, but stewardship of time, a stewardship of wisdom that you've gathered over the years, and things like that. So stewardship has come out as we've talked as being a really important thing. Faith and finance, that's the name, that's the title that you said is the story that's told.
Mhm.
And not everybody believes the same way that I do, but we have made mistakes over the years, but God has always been central, and we've still made mistakes.
Sure.
And have we always been faithful as we should have been? No. The answer is a resounding no. We haven't always been. But preserving those values as much as possible, and everybody makes their own choice here. Thank God he didn't make us all robots
Hmm.
to follow him. We have
Sure.
that volition, ability to choose. Um, but that also factors into how your family creates this legacy. And I thought that was really insightful too, that's how money goes poof. If you do this traditional idea of everybody gets a piece at the end, rather than the family is the family bank, and it creates businesses, it creates value, and creates a philanthropy part. And yes, everybody can participate, but the idea is that it continues to grow and
Yeah.
could be like, there's very few families out there that have been able to do this, and not all of them are faith-based for sure. I don't think the Rockefellers are faith-based. But that's one example of a legacy that has continued to live on, but there's very few of those out there. And maybe it's because some of the smaller ones we don't hear about, and maybe those are the people that you're talking about. You can have this as well. You might not be as famous, and frankly, I wouldn't want to be as the Rockefellers, but you could have your own family bank, family legacy that you can create, and you can teach them how to do that, right? If this is something that you do for people or help people with.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the right mechanism, John. And in fact, if listeners have a suggestion, I'd love it if you'd get a hold of John or me. Should I write a book? Should I offer consulting? It's important to me to steward my time well, but also to help other families, and families that can maintain their assets through generations are hugely influential. They're going to hire a lot of people. They're going to have a huge impact on their communities, and that's super important to me. So, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's the right mechanism to help other families do this very thing. One of the things you mentioned as you were talking about stewardship was families holding people together and stewarding stuff, right? And there's this word that we sometimes use interchangeably with family called household. And a household is a house or a family that holds on to things. And it holds on to assets, and it holds on to people, and it holds on to ideas, and it holds on to communities. And the family is the central unit of society. I know in the Enlightenment age, we've really focused on the individual. And in relation to the government, I think that's probably appropriate. I want to have individual rights as distinguished from the government. But when you think about what makes society work, the family is the core unit, and households that are effective at holding on to things become hugely influential over time.
Yeah, I think, and you think about this too, is if you are a man or woman of faith, and that
Mhm.
is very, very important to you, how much more powerful could you be in that mission? Because I think of our own family, and we have this desire to spread the good news of Christ.
Mhm.
That's a huge purpose of what God put me on the earth for. And my kids same way, my wife same way. But how much more powerful could you be as a unit, number one, and number two, if you had the money and resources and even maybe a business entity, something that was creating more money, that money can be a tool that you use to further that mission if you did it purposefully and used it wisely. So
Yeah.
this is super powerful. What is the very best way, by the way, before we go any further, for somebody to contact you? If and I'll put it down in the show notes, folks, and you'll have my information down there as well.
Sure. Well, so the my wife and I recently started a company called Abundant Thought Revolution. So Jesus came that we would have life and have it abundantly. And he said, repent, change your thinking, and believe the good news of the kingdom. So abundantthoughtrevolution.com. And so there's an info and a form to contact us. So if you say, hey, here's a suggestion on shared governance, man, I will attend to that. I'll pay attention. I'll read your email. So I'd love to interact with that some more. Yeah. So actually, as you're talking about kind of your mission, I've found that kids are a little bit intimidated by the investing side. If you're in your 20s to say, "Oh, I'm gonna help make decisions on $5 million" or whatever the case, that's whoa, that's pretty scary.
Wait, I'm
But
trying to just make my grocery bill last month, right? When you're in your 20s.
exactly, exactly. But they like giving money away. And so the philanthropy committee, or the ability to pitch, the family on we should give money to this entity or this organization. They tend to have a lot of big hearts and have a lot of compassion, and so that's a great entry point. Even if you don't want to do all this rigmarole that I've done, but you want to get your kids more involved in thinking about money and good stewardship, say, hey, here's 10,000 bucks we're going to give away this year. Let's decide together how we're going to do it. And then they'll come up with their idea. Let's say they say the animal shelter. Okay, great. By the way, why? Why the animal shelter?
Mm-hmm.
Now suddenly you've snuck it in on them. You're having a values conversation.
Right.
What's important about that? I mean, I'm doing Bill Backrack values-based selling here, right?
Right. Yes.
It's
I'm very familiar. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I can
Yeah.
tell you
What's
are
important to you about that? And
about that.
why? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now you've just sort of backdoored them into a conversation about values that maybe they wouldn't have wanted to like sign up for an hour-long Zoom meeting with dad about, but giving money to the Humane Society or whoever it is, why? What's important about that? What makes that something our family should do? And should that guide our future giving decisions and things like that? Now we're cooking.
Yeah. This is really good. I encourage folks to get in touch with you and give some of their ideas and to think about this on a little bit deeper level, maybe based on what you've heard today in the podcast, because I think it is, again, I'm overusing the word powerful, but I think it's appropriate here in terms of what it can mean, not just for your life as the listener to this podcast, but your entire family's life and then the impact that they could have upon others. So I encourage you to reach out to John Knowlton or John Browning, either one. Those of you who are regular listeners to the Building Your Life podcast know you can reach me at guardianrockwealth.com, or you can text the word life to 321-421-5213. And we promise we only send you one text, and we don't spam you with a bunch of text, but you'll get a link to all kinds of free information and ways to learn about various topics like this one. both in the podcast or on our daily morning update or through our written materials. And really, our main purpose here is to educate people and give people great ideas to pursue on their own. And then, secondarily, if you'd like help, if you'd like to uh, make sure that your wealth is managed in a way that is honoring to your values, and we would love to be that advocate for you here at Guardian Rock Wealth. But is there any like parting something you want people not to forget? If you
Hmm.
didn't take anything else away from this podcast, John, what would you want them to remember?
Yeah, I would want people to value the power of their family. And even if you're not married, you came from some family and you have friends, maybe you have cousins or nieces and nephews, but there's something super um, core about family. And there's a trend that's kind of going around on on social media amongst millennials of they're like disinheriting their parents because of their political views or their
Mm,
they're withholding the grandkids and things like this. And I would say we're going to be a much better, much happier individuals and a much stronger culture if we lean into family instead of away from it. Money simply magnifies who you already are. So money doesn't make you a better person, it doesn't make you a worse person, but it gives you a bigger platform for whatever your true values are. And so let's lean into money. Excuse me, let's lean into family, and then the money will help to make that even stronger.
yeah, love it. That's a great way to end things up. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today. And hopefully, some people reach out as well. But until next time, folks, we'll bid adieu and we look forward to talking to everybody later on.